educated in the Medicine Hat public school system, and he attended university in Edmonton. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in French and History, 1975. And he has a teaching diploma from the University of Alberta from 1976. He taught a year in Edmonton, English and French language arts, postgraduate studies in communications at the University of Grenoble in France, and worked 2 years with the University of Alberta in public relations and recruitment. Malcolm joined the family brick company, IXL, in 1980 and worked there ever since, apparently 39 going on to 40 years now, somewhere in that neighborhood. And he worked largely in that capacity in marketing and management. Malcolm has close ties to the Historical Society, to our own society here. He was the former director of our organization and also secretary of the Historical Society. The amazing thing is, as I look through this, you'll find that Malcolm has been involved in community activities for all his life. I don't think he could live without it. The only thing that might pull him away, of course, is bagpipes. Okay? We always associate bagpipes with Malcolm. Let's pull a few more things out here. He is a member of other organizations as well in the community. He's a member of the Heritage Resources Committee. And he was editor. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to read a fascinating historical book, and it's called The Bear and the Bone King. If you don't have it, please go to the library. They have copies there. But I'm sure that he just may have a few hanging around. And if you would like to get one of those, they are exceptionally fine books. He is a member of the Heritage Resources Committee, a member of the Archaeological Society of Southeast Alberta. He's chair of the Medicine Hat Brick and Tile Committee for the Friends of the Delta Society, and also a member of the Friends of the Monarch. Now, current projects right now, Heritage in the Hat column. He's been involved, of course, with that particular area for quite a number of years. And what he's talking about, and what we'll see tonight, is he's been working on the completion of the on-site of the Redcliff crest brick. And many of you will also associate the great amount of work Malcolm has done on the restoration of the Mackenzie Charlotte Grocery Municipal Historic Resource. In fact, I took some visitors just 2 days ago past that area, and we actually walked on the area. I don't know if that's allowed or not. Now, as far as some recognition, he has the Civic Pride Award from the City of Medicine Hat, and the Paul Harris Fellow from the Rotary Club. And most important, I think, this year, we are noted that he received the prestigious Alberta Order of Excellence. And for that, I think we should give him a round of applause. That's an amazing presentation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our guest speaker.
Thank you very much, Alan. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the Redcliff Press brick plant and a little bit of corporate history associated with it. This is the plant that was on Mitchell Street in Redcliff. There were 3 plants in Redcliff at one time, one on Broadway, one down on Mitchell, and one over on Main Street. And really there's not much left except of the remnants of the Redcliffe press brick. So just a little quick rewind on brick history. It began in Medicine Hat in 1886, that's only 3 years after the railroad arrived, and on the site of Medicine Hat brick and tile. And in this photo actually, which is taken about 1901, you can see quite interestingly there, they have a little pile of coal beside the kiln there, and they're also drilling for natural gas. So this is a real interesting photo from that point of view. This is more likely what the original brickyard looked like in its earliest days. This particular one was at the west end of the Burnside Flat, circa 1897. And this was Henry Breyer, so Breyer Park. Henry Breyer set up a soft brick operation, and so reduced to its simplest elements. You had a Red River cart style dumping wagon cart at the back there. They'd go and dig the clay up the side of the hill. They'd bring it over. You had 2 horses turning round and round and round a mixer called a pug mill. And they'd add a bit of water, and out the bottom would come muck. And they would take the muck and they would form it into balls of dough, just like making bread, as you can see he's doing there. And they would push it into a wooden mold, dump the load onto those boards, let them dry in the sun for a bit, then stack them up and dry them some more, and then eventually pile them up and burn them with coal. So this is a very simple form of brickyard, and when you think there were actually, over the years, there were 10 brick manufacturing operations in the Redcliffe and Medicine Hat area. Several of them were quite elementary, like this one. So, arrives about 1900, and Medicine Hat and Redcliffe are starting to take off. The population starts to boom, natural gas is fueling the industry, and there is a huge demand for brick for everything from churches to schools, commercial buildings, chimneys, all the chimneys, every house had a chimney, they needed brick. And I read when they were talking about that previous photo of the 1900s that there was a deficit of 500,000 brick in Medicine Hat in 1901. So it's no wonder that there were various people that thought that the brick industry was a place to go and get involved. So serious brickworks were needed though, not just handmade operations, and this is the Alberta clay products, circa 1908 or sometime thereafter. It was built in 08, located down by the rail yards. And this is a visit of the Yellow Hat Club. Actually, it's been colorized, and those are British manufacturers. I'm sure they'd be horrified to see a picture of themselves all wearing yellow hats. Meanwhile, up at Stair Ranch, which was also called Stonerville or was conceptually going to be called Stonerville, and eventually became Redcliffe with an E, and then they dropped the E. Dr. Stoner there, on the right-hand side, was from Minnesota, and he bought the Stair Ranch and became a property developer in Redcliffe. And one of his first transactions was to sell some comrades a parcel of land to build the Redcliffe Brick and Coal. So 1907, I noticed in that period they were spelling it as 2 words, the Redcliffe Brick Company was established. And it was in operation the next year. And very simple operation, brick and coal, because they were mining the coal in the riverbank just below the end of Main Street. So literally, if you're out at Equidale and look across the river, you can see where the coal workings were there. And you can still see traces of the landscape that has been somewhat modified by the works. And so during the winter, when it was difficult to make brick, you could mine coal, and there was a good market for coal in those days. So the Redcliffe Brick and Coal experienced a fire almost right away, and these entrepreneurs in Minnesota called upon A.W. Woodcock, so Arthur Wellington Woodcock, who was a brick manufacturer already in a small town called Brickton in eastern Minnesota. And so he came out in 1909 and fixed the brick and coal plant and began operating it for his colleagues. He also brought out his friend, Ernest Selhorn. So, you know, the Selhorn name, that's where they came, that's when they came as well. So here's the basics of pressed brick making. A little bit more complicated than the first slides, which were more soft mud brick and wood most. But you could order these components out of a catalog and put together a pressed brick plant. So the key elements were an engine of some type. In this case, they're talking about an Anderson oil engine. Out here, they were using natural gas to drive the engines, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the engine would drive a line shaft, which was just a big shaft that ran right through the plant and had pulleys or wheels on it. And so the main drive belt would come from the engine and drive the line shaft. And then you took power off the line shaft to run the press, the brick press, and the dry pan mill, and any other pieces of equipment. And if you go down to the Delta, in the back of the Delta, you can see a line shaft in place, still there from the early period of the century, of the last century, I guess. So basically, you mine your clay, dig it out of the ground, and all around Redcliff there was pretty much just go straight down and find clay was suitable. You grind it in the dry pan mill, which is the wheeled machine at the back, and you can see that on display up at Redcliff. I'll have a picture of that later on. You pass it over a screen to get the lumps out of it. You elevate it up to the mixture at the top there, and then it drops into brick press, which big machine that basically compresses the clay into bricks, and then they get hauled down into a kiln, which is not shown here. But all three of the brick plants in Redcliff pretty much operated on this principle as the Alberta Clay Products, and there was a pressing operation at Medicine Hat Brick and Tile as well. So it was quite a common mechanical way of making bricks back 100 and some odd years ago. So here we are mining clay by hand, and as you can see, they have a very simple gas furnace going there, which from what I can see is just a pipe with gas coming out of it and it's burning. So not too much concern for fuel efficiency back then. Gas was quite plentiful, but the clay had to be dug out of the side of the hill, put in a cart, hauled up to the plant. And if you think about a pallet of bricks, and you can visualize that, that's about a ton, it takes about a ton of clay. So for every pallet of bricks that was made, these guys had to shovel a ton of clay into those carts. So not for the faint of heart. This is a close-up of the actual pressing operation. As you can see, the press operator would stand in front of the press, and every cycle of the press, typically about 8 or 9 cycles per minute, cranking out usually in some of the smaller presses 4 brick, some of the bigger presses 6 brick. If you do the math, 8 times 6, 48 brick a minute that he has to handle. And in the old days, they would put them on these brick carts. These brick carts were marvels of engineering. They had a suspension system, and they were perfectly balanced. You could put several hundred pounds of brick on the cart, and one guy could trundle that down off to the kilns. So, all very manual operation, but they had engineered it to make it as efficient as possible. Another component that favored brick production in Redcliff and Medicine Hat was cheap and available natural gas. Huge advantage, and I was reading one account of the Calgary Pressed Brick and Sandstone Company that closed its doors in the 30s, and one of the things they said was they couldn't compete with the brick made in Medicine Hat and Redcliff with their cheap natural gas. So it was a huge advantage and available to fuel all sorts of industries. Another advantage for the brick manufacturers in this area is they had ready access to the main line of the CPR. And up until around the First World War, the CNR was supposed to come down here too. But you can see that in the town of Redcliff, there were spur lines that went to each of the three plants, the Redcliff clay products, down to the Redcliff press brick, and another one over to the Redcliff brick and coal. And as well, there was another spur line that went to the Bayless coal mine on the west side of Redcliff. So you had a means to, you had fuel, you had clay, you could purchase the equipment, and you could get your bricks to market. This is a plan of Redcliff that was developed before the First World War. The clay products, the C space is where the Redcliff Premier brick is that was invisible from Broadway. And on the west side of it is Mitchell Street. And they never did actually build all those houses. So everything stopped in World War I and never really got going again. So the Redcliff Clay Products plant, which became eventually the Redcliff Premier, was established in 1910. So very similar kind of operation as you can see. The manufacturing building and then the kilns and the chimneys. And it was one of some of the principals in that plant. One of them was Joseph Lucier, who was a contractor as well, and probably got this going so that he could have a ready supply of bricks. He built St. Barnabas, and he was involved in several other major buildings around town. And he was from Eastern U.S. He was an architect, and in Medicine Hat he was also a contractor. And his son signed up with the Royal Flying Corps during World War I. And this plant had some financial difficulties around World War I and changed hands a couple of times before it settled into being known as the Redcliff Premier. And finally, the Redcliff Press Brick Company was established in 1912. So even though IXL is, and the Redcliff Press Brick is the company that lasted the longest in the brick industry, we were actually the Johnny-come-latelys to the party. And this is the plant that was on Mitchell Street, as they say. You can see the inclined track that went down into the underground mine. And how, in fact, did this plant get established? And this is, I'll go more in detail about this particular operation. So the main driver, I would say, was probably James Hargrave. And he had a career as a fur trader with the Hudson's Bay Company. He came west in 1867 in a journey that is we still have the documentation of his trip. We got his instructions from the Bay on how to get to Fort Garry from Montreal. And it involved train travel and a boat trip up the Red River. And the final stage was, you will be met by a guide with a Red River cart. And in 1867, this crossed Sioux territory, Dakota territory. They were on the warpath. So as the memoir that I read mentioned, they weren't allowed to light up a smudge fire to keep the mosquitoes at bay for fear of attracting the attention of the Sioux. Anyway, he went around to various trading posts. He was at Fort Francis, he was at Portage la Prairie, where he met his wife, Alexandra Sissons. And that's a very complicated story. Sometime I'll go to that more depth, but they had one final posting at Cumberland House, and just to get a sense of kind of the pioneer spirit that they had, James went on ahead to his posting at Cumberland House, and his wife, Alexandra, and their three toddlers followed in winter with an Indian guide in a dog sled, 600 kilometers through the bush, kind of generally north by northwest. So they were made of tough stuff, these guys. So this is my great-grandfather. And 1882, he decided the fur trade is maybe winding down, so he decides to try farming near Portage. That lasts for a year. So then he comes west, and the rail is as far as Maple Creek at that point. And he and his brother-in-law, Dan Sissons, ride on to Medicine Hat, which was a surveyor's tent town at the time. And they ride on to Fort Calgary, have a look around Fort Calgary, decide that it's never going to amount to much, and then they ride back to Medicine Hat. So he establishes a trading business here. His partner, Dan Sissons, establishes their second outlet at Fort Carlton, and they are doing a pretty good business. One of his early ventures was to outfit the local Cree to collect buffalo bones on the prairie and bring them back for shipment east. And it's interesting that one of the comments that his son Will Hargrave made was that, my dad told me that in all the years dealing with the Cree, there was never a bad trade, and there was never any issue with credit or anything, which is not something you could say about the white settlers in Medicine Hat. So he, 1912, he's been in business for a while, and his son Will Hargrave is down east in Montreal and going to school and meets this young fellow called Herb Sissons. They become friends. Herb Sissons is an electrician by training, and he is actually selling hotel kitchen equipment. And he comes out west and stops in to visit the family of his friend, and they get to talking about opportunities in Medicine Hat. And 1912 in Medicine Hat was probably one of the fastest growing communities in North America on a per capita basis. It was just exploding. If you look at the number of buildings, schools, commercial buildings built in that 1910 to 1914 era, it's amazing. So they decide that there's an opportunity in the brick business, and they gather up money from their various families, but they're missing one key element, and that's somebody who knows how to make brick. Kind of an important thing if you're going to go in the brick business. So Arthur Woodcock moves over from the brick and coal, becomes a shareholder in the business, and I think he's basically responsible for building that first brick plant, or the Redcliff brick plant, the Redcliff Press brick plant. And then he operates it from 1912 to 1926. So there he is standing on the platform there. The brick has come out of the kilns, it's waiting to be loaded into the boxcars. And you can see a boxcar in the background there. First big project was St. Teresa's Academy, and the story I heard, the brick were actually hauled across the prairie on a sled, because it was sort of flat across the prairie, and must have been snow at the time of the year they were moving the brick. With a great sense of timing, so they're just in business, the plant's up and running, it's 1913, 1914 comes, and the war and non-essential industries basically are stripped of their manpower, and most of the brick plants were shut down during the war. And this particular photo is at the corner of, that's the Monarch Theatre in the background with the arch. And that's what it looked like back then. And this nice brick building on the corner is where Tramps was, covered with green stucco today. It's actually quite an attractive building. So in the foreground here we have Colonel Frank Sissons, who was the son of Dan Sissons, so basically James Hargrave's nephew, and the 3rd Canadian Mounted Rifles getting ready to head out to Europe. So after the war, Carl Hargrave, who is the youngest son of James Hargrave, comes back. He flew with the Royal Flying Corps. But in 1917, before he went overseas, he marries the daughter of Arthur Woodcock. So Amy Woodcock becomes Amy Hargrave. And after the war, Carl comes back to Redcliff, and he goes to work for his brother-in-law, Herb Sissons, at the Redcliffe Press brick plant, running the press. Well, that lasts for about 3 years, and then he's hired away by the Redcliffe Clay Products, and he goes to work there as the manager. So I've often thought it would be very interesting to sit around the Sunday evening table having dinner with your competitor sitting across from you. And the Hargraves, Carl and Amy, lived in that house up till about 1981. Joan? When did you guys take over? 81?
76.
76, okay. I don't know the dates. So about 1920 as well, same era, we switched to the original form of mining, which was underground mining. And you can still see one of the drifts on the right there, which would be an underground tunnel, and starting to work the as open pit mining. And so they had pit ponies at the bottom there that would pull these rail carts, and they would take them to the bottom of the inclined track and would take it up to the plant. So this photo taken about 1926. This is Gordon, Tom, and my dad reporting to work for their first day of work, commuting on their horse captain. And so they were associated with the brick industry from a fairly early age, I would say. So 1926, the Redcliffe Press Brick Company, what they got the IXL trademark. Redcliffe Reds is another one of their trademarks. They're manufacturing face brick, mantle brick, chimney brick, and common brick. Face brick were sort of select brick, very uniform size and color, but there was a huge need for what was also called common brick, a little bit more uneven color, size, and those were often used in sidewalls of buildings and actually even inside buildings and basements. If you look at an old building built about 1912, you can usually see a difference between the front of the building and the sides. So they were distributors for hull tile, flue lining, drain tile, and fire brick at this time. So I suspect those were being purchased from the Alberta Clay Products. Now this particular calendar ended up in Wood Mountain, Saskatchewan, at a lumberyard. And so they were shipping brick to lumberyards. You think about back then, every house needed a chimney. There were no metal chimneys particularly at that point. And I figured you need about a pallet of bricks to build a basic straight up chimney. And so you could get about, I figured it out, about 40 chimneys out of a rail car of brick. So all these lumberyards were buying a boxcar of brick probably once or twice a year, and the brick were all loaded into the 20,000, 24,000 brick loaded into a boxcar by hand, packed with straw, and sometimes the demand was so hot, the bricks were still hot out of the kiln, that they would set the straw on fire and cause a fire in the boxcar. So 1926, Arthur Woodcock retires, or he seemed to always go by AW for whatever reason, and Harry Sheesby takes over as superintendent, and I think they're expecting here a modern piece of mining equipment, maybe to take over from the guys with their shovels and picks. (1929), with another wonderful sense of timing, they buy the Medicine Hat Brick and Tile, which has gone through a number of different owners by this point, and the very next year the Depression starts. So the brick and tile had a different product line, so it gave them some product diversification. Hollow tile was probably the main product for the plant at the time. And during the Depression years, James Hargrave passes away, and Jim Mitchell took over as president in 1935. And president then was equivalent to chairman of the board. And Herb Sissons really continued as the manager, but president was chairman of the board at that time. And during the company records show that during the 30s, for the first 5 years of the 1930s, sales fell in half each year from the prior year, so that by 1935, they were only operating 1 month out of the year. So it's pretty tough times back then. So in 1944, the war has caused things to pick up a bit, and brick plants are running again. The premier plant had been shut down during the Depression, and Carl Hargrave had gone off and joined Dominion Glass, so he was no longer there. And Redcliff Press Brick bought the premier brick mainly for the gas well, which was on the corner. And it's still there on the corner of Broadway. But this is the plant that you could see on Broadway right up until the 70s. Another individual I'd like to mention, I unfortunately couldn't find a photo of him, Henry Sangster. He started with Redcliff Press in 1932 as an employee, and he became bookkeeper, then the office manager. And he was office manager right through to 1960, but he was also did a stint as mayor of the town of Redcliff. And then in 1960, he became manager of the press brick division, which included the premier plant, and then he finally retired in 1969. So he was a fairly major figure in Redcliff history. 1949, my grandfather, Herb Sissons, passed away, and his eldest son, Gordon, who'd been working with the company since about 43 or 44, took over as general manager, and he had a background in mining engineering. Also in 1949, there was a major modernization of the plant operation. So at this time, this is the actual steam engine that ran the plant up until 1939. And my grandfather had gone down to Montreal and purchased it used. It was a coreless steam engine which had a particular valve design that made it much more efficient than other engineered or other steam engines of the era. But this particular engine, so they had a gas-fired boiler that created steam, that pushed the piston, that ran the wheel, that turned the shaft, that ran all the other equipment and so on. You could probably write a song about that. So the machine was sold actually to a sawmill down in Crow's Nest Pass, where it continued to do duty for a number of years. And then it was acquired by the Reynolds Museum in Wetaskiwin. So it is sitting in the front entrance of the Reynolds Museum in Wetaskiwin, and they have it actually activated, not running on steam, but it actually turns. And it's quite an interesting machine to look at. This is a view of the Redcliff Press Brick before the 1951 fire. So interesting to me, they've already opened up a quarry on the north side of the plant. And you can see the two tall chimneys, about 85 feet tall. And then to the left, you can see some more chimneys. And there were some more kilns there originally, including two beehive kilns. And so the open pit mining was going on immediately inside the plant, and the plant was still basically running on these periodic kilns. The marketing was involved, it was before the era of TV, and so mainly it involved going to things like trade shows and distributing calendars and making face-to-face contact with the customers. But you can see they were promoting various lines of brick at that time. One of the interesting ones is Herb Sissons had come up with a particular design for a hollow plate tile that had a little notch on the top and it interlocked, so we patented it. And you are taking apart old buildings around town, sometimes you'll run into these tile with a little notch in it. So that's a Sissons quick clay interlocking plate tile. So by the 60s, Tom Sissons had come back to the company in 1951, and my father, Jack Sissons, in 1953, and joined their brother Gordon in managing the company. And so the company, the Redcliff Press Brick Company, celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1962. Henry Sangster was still managing the Redcliff division. And they had, from the early 50s, actually embarked on quite a program of modernization and expansion. They built the Medicine Hat sewer pipe plant. They purchased a brick plant in Edmonton. They added tunnel kilns to the, first of all, to the Medicine Hat plant and then to the Redcliff plant. So there was a huge expansion. The Western economy was growing rapidly. There was a huge demand for brick, and so the biggest challenge they had in those days was keeping up with the demand. And by modernizing, they were able to distinguish themselves from competition who were still mainly operating periodic kilns. So periodic kiln, you have to load it up by hand, mud up the door, bring it up to temperature, fire the product for several days, then let it cool down, open the door, unload it by hand. While a tunnel kiln is just as you can imagine, it's a big long tunnel. And if you ever get a chance to tour the Medicine Hat brick and tile plant, you can have a ride through a tunnel kiln to see what it's like on the inside. Probably no place else in the world will you be able to do that. So just saying. So the tunnel kiln, the temperature at each point in the kiln is kept constant, and the brick are to basically rail wagons with a refractory deck, and they go through the kiln. So it's a continuous process and much more efficient than the old style of loading and unloading kilns. So in Redcliff, this plant, the first tunnel kiln was installed in 1965. And you can see the modern part of the building on the left side of the structure. They kept the old periodic kilns on the right side. And you can see in the background, you can see the old quarry, which is gradually being filled in. And the rail spur is still there. And lots of brick available for shipping in forward. Once they built the tunnel kiln, the premier plant pretty much became obsolete, so they closed it in '67, and it was demolished in 1976. And a former division manager for the Redcliff plant, Dave Humphreys, told me a story about the day they took down these chimneys. So the militia had offered to use their explosive expertise to take down these chimneys. And so they managed to blow a hole in the side of the chimney, making it higher than stable, but the chimney didn't go anywhere. And the bricks were, in the explosion that took place, the bricks were scattered hither, thither, and yon. So that this very unstable chimney was hanging up there in the air. And so the next day, the IXL mining crew climbed up the chimney, attached a cable around it, and they attached the cable to a D9 cap and just pulled it over. So, interesting too, the bricks that were left still had quite a good salvage value. In those days, labor was cheap, especially if you hired the Boy Scouts to clean them and package them for a few cents a brick. So once Superintendent Harry Sheesby retired in 1960, he was replaced by Kyle Nielsen until 78, and then Reg Els was the next superintendent until 1985. And Reg is standing in the center of this picture. I think this is probably before he became superintendent, because he looks like he's doing hard work. Superintendents don't do any hard work, but I'm just kidding. One of our superintendents is present, and I'm sure he'll be speaking to me later about that. But they're basically, in this picture, they're rebuilding the front end of one of the periodic kilns. So in 1980, a second tunnel kiln was added to increase the production capacity. And you can see in this picture, you can see what a tunnel kiln looks like. Basically, there's the kiln car that had the refractories, and then there's the actual face brick or piled on the kiln car. And that just continues to roll through the kiln, 18 cars a day typically going through and coming out the other end. So the last time the periodic kilns were fired was 1981. So I started with the company in 1980. I'd previously been hired to cut the grass and shorten the irrigation equipment by a couple inches with the lawnmower, but I worked as a summer student, but 1980 I came back, and so I was able to see the last firing of these old periodic kilns in 1981. And they fired fire brick in them. There's still quite a demand for fire brick at that time. Fast forward now to the early 2000s, and the Alberta government of the period was embarking on a program to reduce what they considered to be the accident rate in the province. And we had the problem where every time that sales would spike, we'd increase production, we'd have to start up a second kiln, which meant we'd have to hire a whole bunch of new guys to work on it, and often if they wouldn't work hard, they would have a back strain or an arm strain, and they would go off for a few days, which the government considered to be an accident. And so they were particularly cracking down on us, so it was time to consider what our alternatives might be to carrying on the old way of doing things. And to be honest, this was backbreaking work. That was hard work for 8 hours a day, so there had to be a better way. And so in 2004, the Redcliff plant was closed. The presses were moved down to the Medicine Hat plant, and we installed robots to set the brick. And so once the system was debugged, this was poetry in motion. These robots were ever so smooth. They were there every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, ready to start. They didn't get tired, they didn't take coffee breaks. They just did their thing, and the computer ran them, and the guys that previously had lots of hard work just got to watch computer screens and every now and then tighten the bolt or that sort of thing, take a measurement. So it really was a good, smooth system, and the only thing I can say is we had a choice of building up on high ground at Redcliff or consolidating down by the nice scenic Ross Creek. So another poor decision, I guess, in the long run. So this was kind of a sad moment. Al Dillman and Darrell Walker, the burner, turned off the kiln at Redcliff for the last time in 2004. And that was the last time the Redcliff plant operated. And a couple of years later, we were taking down the buildings, but we kept the old kilns because they were the very last remnants of where our company started. So we were a little bit reluctant to completely demolish the plant. And this painting was done quite a bit earlier, I would say probably in the 50s, by Mary Hargrave, who was the wife of Tom Hargrave and the mother of Bert Hargrave that many of you would know. And so she was painted as one of the beehive kilns at Redcliff that were gone before I ever was aware of them. So what are the remnants of the brick industry in Redcliff? There is the former Redcliff Clay Products, also known as Premier, later known as Premier, and for most of its existence, probably Premier. The manager's residence, which is right at the corner of Broadway and Mitchell. So originally that housed the office for the plant, and later was taken over by Carl Hargrave and Amy Woodcock, and they raised their family there, and the house is still occupied. Issue, so we had to come up with a different plan, and so we demolished most of them, but we left the footprint of the kilns, and most of the brick is still on site there, buried under a mound, so that someday Bruce and his band of amateur archaeologists can go and excavate the remains and rediscover where the kilns were. There's a ton of brick there too. Maybe one day if brick becomes scarce and rare, it might be mined for the brick. So we have created a historic park to commemorate the last brick plant in Redcliff. The entrance gates replicate the gate posts that are found at the corner of Broadway and Mitchell. And we have several of the key pieces of equipment on display. As we were preparing to put the park together, we collected examples of the different products made by all the different plants in Redcliff, not just our own plant, but the brick and coal and the Premier plant. There's an amazing number of types of brick, but typically the name of the manufacturer, or perhaps his trade name, was imprinted into the frog of the brick. So the frog is the depression that you see on the bedding plane of the brick there. And so probably over the years, the most common one you would see would be IXL, but you might see ACP, which would be Alberta Clay Products. Certainly there's brick and coal and Premier are also some of the common ones that you'd see around town in old buildings. We also created a sampling of the colors that the plant made over the years, and I have yet to attach labels that would name the colors, but hopefully that'll be done shortly if the weather lets up a bit. So all those different colors, not just red. In the early days, your choice was red or red, and any color you want, as long as it's red. And then over the years, it was discovered that by flashing, injecting additional gas into the kiln and a reduction atmosphere where the gas wasn't completely consumed would have a darkening effect. And you can see some of them have that darkening effect with a kind of a halo or a circle around the face of the brick. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, we discovered clay sources out in the Cypress Hills that would allow us to make buff colored brick and other light colors, and by adding mixes of red burning clay and buff burning clay, you could get browns and tans. So there was a whole range of colors that were developed over the years. And colors from this plant in recent years, so initially the brick served Medicine Hat area, then kind of Alberta, Calgary was a big market, and then Western Canada. But in later years, especially when sales declined, we were shipping brick as far east as Washington, D.C., and south as far as Phoenix, and Los Angeles, and right over to Japan. So brick from this plant went to a lot of different places. We've maintained the remnants of one of those 85-foot tall chimneys that used to dot the horizon of Redcliff. There were any number of them that used to, from among the three plants. And now this is basically what's left of that one. They were massive structures. I think 85 feet high. It's like an 8-story building. It's huge. We did preserve two other structures on site. The small kiln there was a test kiln, so they could test different colors of clay without committing to a whole large kiln load of brick. And the other buildings had various uses, but originally it was called the pyrometer shack. So it was where they kept the temperature testing equipment. And so the key pieces are on display. There'll be signage to describe them. And one of the key components of the park, we had Jim Marshall design a mural for it. And we got Al Dimon to explain things to the artists and how the pieces of equipment used to work. And they found a cheap bricklayer to do the hard work. And so the three of us, Jim and Al and I, built this mural that is pictures of the brick industry. And there's a concrete stage, a bit like what's in Riverside Park. So we're hoping that public events and entertainment and that sort of thing can be held here. And it's two of the pictures are of actual scenes, photographs taken in the plant, and the third one is from an old drawing that shows the plant itself. So I've yet to put up the signage, but we'll hopefully have signage that will describe all the pieces of equipment. And we hope to have an opening sometime in 2020. And it's almost done and ready now. And that's the end. So I can take some questions.
What led to the decline in the market for brick?
So in 1980, in the 70s and 80s, there was a huge expansion in the economy. The economy was just boiling along, and if you think of West Edmonton Mall, there's over 1 million brick in West Edmonton Mall. A typical school would take 500,000 brick. A high school would take, an elementary school, a high school would take quite a bit more. Government buildings, like the AGT Tower, there was just a lot of things going on that were absorbing a lot of brick. However, at the same time, what we didn't really truly appreciate was that whereas prior to 1980, most houses had a fireplace, a brick fireplace and chimney, and usually when the bricklayer was on site, he would brick up the front of the house. So we were seeing typically on average, if you took the total number of housing starts and divided by the amount of housing brick, we were looking at 5,000 brick per start. But that was starting to melt away in the late 70s as, first of all, zero clearance fireplaces and then gas burning fireplaces replaced that business. And as well, of course, the National Energy Plan caused the Western economy to really slow down. And technological change, there was other materials that started to come on the market. And so, whereas we hit in 1981, we hit our peak shipments of 93 million brick that year. It declined quite rapidly in the early 80s with the recession, and then it just never recovered. So, actually, my career, my father and uncle's career was building plants and increasing capacity, and mine was the opposite. I was trying to rationalize and consolidate for most of my career.
Was there a developing shortage of bricklayers as well?
Yes, that was playing into it as well. If you look at Henderson directories from the 1920s, there's lots of bricklayers listed, and there was a common trade, but certainly with our climate, every time it gets cold, there's no work for bricklayers, and you have to go find other things to do. And like many trades, not just bricklaying, but many trades, try and find a plasterer today. There are a lot of trades like that that have become quite specialized, and as older guys retire, they were replaced by younger guys. So that definitely contributed as well. Any other questions, Earl?
Yeah, I understand For example, the Medicine Hat College has a unique brick that was designed for it, if my understanding is correct. And what do you do about replacement bricks for such structures where the design is unique?
Yes, to the first question, it was college blend, I think they called it, and it was variations on other products we had, but yes, it was sort of developed in conjunction with the architects to be somewhat special. It is a problem because unlike, say, concrete or paint, which can be pretty much replicated chemically in various locations, clays are quite unique in how they fire, and you don't get necessarily exactly the same color tones any place but here for that particular brick. So that being said, there are probably close to there's somewhere around 100 brick plants in North America. So the chances of finding something reasonably close with a lot of searching might be feasible, but it won't match. And even from year to year, it's difficult to match exactly, because as the clay seams become exhausted and you switch to a new mix, you wouldn't always get exactly the same, precisely the same shape. It's more of an art than a science in that respect. Yes, Janice.
All the clay, various brick plants from down by the creek up to Redcliff. Is that clay all basically from the same level, sort of the same source? Or?
Yes, the basic red burning clay that started the industry is from the Old Man clay formation, and so what you see as being brown clay, the brown cliffs that you see, has naturally occurring iron oxide in the clay, and so when it's fired, that turns it red. And to be honest, that clay is not the best clay in the world. And the advantage of dry pressing was that you could take a clay that was not optimal, and because you were not adding as much moisture to it, you could get it dry. Drying the clay is always the first challenge. And so for a clay that's not really optimal, you can press it more easily than you can extrude it, which was the Medicine Hat plant production method. And then the clays from the Cypress Hills were actually laid down at a later period and have, well, different chemical components, but some very good firing quality. Some of them are stoneware quality and really quite good ceramically. Yes?
Could you outline what your family business did with the Doug and Ewart house and the artist in residence at Medalta?
Okay, two separate things. Your Duggan House was the very first project built of locally made brick. So 1886, the first kiln loads of brick were used to build John Ewart's house for his new bride, Jessie Harold, who was the daughter of Reverend Harold, the minister. And so soft mud brick, so handmade soft mud brick, fired by coal. So if you look at the brick up close, you'll see there's quite a variety of it. You might see thumbprints in it because it was fairly soft when it was first made. You might see cat paws if you look carefully, and quite a wide range of color tones and sizes. And they're somewhat misshapen. They're not very precise, but it's a beautiful wall. If you stand back and look at it, it's an absolutely gorgeous brick wall. The artist in residence is located in a building, I think it was Sunburst Ceramics building. We weren't particularly involved, we weren't involved at all actually with Medalta's side of the business. So I'm not as familiar with that history, but that building was repurposed for the artist in residence with the support of Shaw Cable, and the artist in residence program that's there now brings in artists from basically all over the world to experiment and take advantage of the kilns that are located there. That's nice.
When I moved to Medicine Hat, I was just in love with that really fine brick, like the Assiniboia that red can see it inside the house. Was that produced by your company?
Yes, so glazed brick was a sort of a double-fired brick. It could be put on both pressed brick and extruded brick. So first of all, you take an existing brick, and then you spray a ceramic slurry on it. So basically, a high-temperature liquid clay mixed with colorants. You'd spray it on, like a hand spray, and then you would refire it. And so you just love that candy apple red, I can tell. Bruce?
When I first moved to Medicine Hat, I was told that this building was built from bricks from ISL.
Yes.
So not?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we're actually in one of the later buildings that have been done?
That's right. Well, what are we, 12 years ago now?
Yeah, I guess, okay.
Yes, but yeah, interesting story about the color tones, because Jack Diamond, the architect, was playing around with ideas, and at the back of his mind, I'm pretty sure he was in the process of designing the Toronto Opera Hall as well. Because if you look at the Toronto Opera Hall and look at this building, there's some surprising similarities. But he wanted a black brick, and we didn't make a black brick. We'd already committed to supplying the brick as a donation to the city for this building, thinking it would be red, like that was the signature color down here, right? And relatively economical to produce. So he wanted a black brick that was probably, our cost was about 5 times what the red brick was. So our donation value just skyrocketed. I had a discussion with him though. I said, this is Medicine Hat. This is, not Eastern Canada. And, a mid-July day with the sun out, a black brick building is going to be like a heat lamp. It's going to just be like an oven. And so he took that under advisement, and they looked at the color absorption coefficients for different colors of brick and came up with gray, which I know has been somewhat controversial, but there it is. He went with black down at the Toronto Opera Hall. Yes. Supplementary question from the member.
I understand that I would gather a considerable amount of the buildings in Medicine Hat were built from local bricks, or with local bricks.
Yes.
How unique is that in North America?
It's probably not as unusual as you might think. Consider that, say, around 1900, particularly the West was being developed, and probably 100 years or 200 years earlier, the further east you go, most communities had brickyards. So at one time or another, there were 75 brickyards in Alberta alone. And so many small communities actually had their local brickyard. And at that time, they could produce, especially if labor was cheap and transportation was difficult. And so it was often quite economical to produce brick locally and use it. But then so that was the soft mud brick era, the handmade brick era. But then as more mechanical presses and periodic kilns, beehive kilns, rectangular kilns started to come in, they were much more efficient at producing brick, and the brick was much better quality. So gradually those small brickyards pretty much had died out by the First World War. Now there's a significant exception, was the J.B. Little brickyard in Riverdale Flat in Edmonton that went on till about 1956. But except for them, for the most part, they all pretty much petered out at the First World War, and you were left with these other production facilities that had, typically, if you saw a chimney beside the plant, it was a downdraft kiln, like a beehive kiln. Some of the plants, like the Medicine Hat plant, until the 40s, it was an updraft kiln production facilities. You mean, just basically, you had the outer walls, you loaded the product in the center, you put some refractory product on top, and you fired from the side, and the heat just went straight up, which meant that you had quite a bit more variation in the product that you got out of the kiln. But they were specialized in hollow clay tile and common brick, and so they were producing the Chevys, if you like, whereas the pressed face brick was really considered to be the prestige product. Get the hook, get the hook.
Ellen, did you have something?
I learned some new vocabulary today, which is always lovely. Frog. Was that originally, well, frog. It's that new word, I just love it, a frog anyway. But you don't have to think about it. I was thinking of the etymology of frog because it would be very interesting. I think called froggy before this. So, something's been put together in here for you. Very special. We thank you very much. Very interesting. And I know Alan is very interested in, is supposed to open it now? Well, because we're all interested in this. It's supposed to be special. It is special.
Dun, 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 dun. I'm guessing I probably shouldn't drop this.
Look at the bottom, which is coincides with someone's birthday.
1953, hey, that was a good year. Vintage year. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Malcolm, for the very interesting presentation.